When Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party came to power in Germany in 1933, they quickly transformed the country into a repressive totalitarian dictatorship. The main instrument of Nazi terror was the secret police Gestapo, notorious for its brutality. As a political police force, the Gestapo was given broad authority to protect the regime from racial and political enemies. They used informants, warrantless searches, and brutal interrogation methods, including torture, to silence opposition. In essence, the Gestapo became the most radical enforcer of Nazi policies through violence. Although the Nazi regime appeared strong, not all Germans were loyal to Hitler. Even before the war broke out, a handful of generals and officials were already worried about Hitler's excessive ambitions and brutality. In military circles, General Ludwig Beck was one of the early opponents. As chief of the Army General Staff, Beck opposed Hitler's plan to invade Czechoslovakia in 1938, believing that a war against the Western Allies would bring disaster to Germany. When Hitler ignored that advice, Beck chose to resign from his position, a dramatic step that shocked the officer corps at the time. However, Beck did not remain silent. Secretly, he began conspiring with like-minded colleagues. One of his trusted associates was Colonel Hans Oster, a high-ranking official in the Military Intelligence Service, or Abwehr. In mid-1938, Beck, Oster, and several other officers devised a plan to overthrow Hitler through a military coup if Hitler insisted on invading Czechoslovakia. The group even sought support from the Allies. Oster used the Abwehr network to send secret envoys to the British government, urging London to firmly oppose Hitler's demands in the Sudetenland crisis. The hope was that if Britain and France resisted Hitler, the German generals would feel they had legitimacy to act in overthrowing the dictator. However, the 1938 coup plan was thwarted by appeasement politics. On September 30, 1938, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain signed the Munich Agreement, which fulfilled Hitler's demands for the Sudeten region in Czechoslovakia. Hitler achieved a diplomatic victory without war, which in turn weakened the resolve of the anti-Nazi conspirators. Hitler's success in Munich caused many previously hesitant officers to support him again. The coup was thus not carried out. Beck and Oster were forced to abandon their intentions for the time being. But although it failed in 1938, the seeds of resistance against Hitler did not die out. Ahead of Germany's invasion of Poland in 1939, Beck, Oster, and their comrades briefly revived the plan to overthrow Hitler. But when Germany truly plunged into war in September 1939, the intent to resist became even more difficult to realize. Any action against Hitler risked weakening Germany's war effort and being considered treason. Nevertheless, when World War II broke out, Oster became increasingly bold in taking sabotage measures against Hitler. He even carried out actions that clearly amounted to military treason in order to prevent wider bloodshed. The most dramatic example was his effort to warn the enemy about Germany's invasion plans. From late 1939 to the spring of 1940, Oster secretly leaked the dates of the Nazi assault on the Netherlands to his friend, Major Bert Sass, the Dutch military attaché in Berlin. He informed Sass more than 20 times because the invasion schedule was repeatedly postponed by Hitler. The information smuggled by Oster was passed on by Sass to his government, although unfortunately the Dutch side initially doubted its authenticity and did not take sufficient preventive measures before the attack occurred. Entering 1942, the resistance organized by Oster was not only motivated by patriotism, but also by humanitarianism. He and his colleagues were horrified to witness the atrocities of the Holocaust, which began to operate systematically since 1941. Therefore, they tried to help Nazi victims as much as they could. One of their courageous actions was Operation U-7 in 1942 till 1943, which was a plan to rescue a number of Jewish citizens from the regime's reach. However, in April 1943, the Gestapo detected traces of Operation U-7. The scandal also ensnared Oster. His position as deputy head of the Abwehr made him partly responsible. Oster was finally forced to resign in April 1943. From that point on, Hans Oster officially no longer had power or access within the Wehrmacht structure. He was practically sidelined from the center of military conspiracy ahead of the final phase of the war. Nevertheless, Oster's spirit remained ablaze. He hoped that his still free comrades, such as Stauffenberg and others, could continue the struggle to overthrow Hitler's tyranny. The peak of the German resistance conspiracy against Hitler occurred on July 20, 1944. That day, a group of officers led by Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg launched a bold attempt to assassinate Hitler and seize power. Stauffenberg smuggled a time bomb in a briefcase into the Wolfschanze conference room. The bomb then exploded powerfully, destroying the meeting room and killing several people. However, miraculously, Hitler escaped death. He only suffered minor injuries to his arm and was still alive. The failure to kill the dictator caused the coup plan to fall apart. That afternoon, the Nazi regime moved quickly to retaliate. SS and Gestapo troops were deployed to hunt down the conspirators in Berlin and other cities. The wave of repression after the July 20th plot was extremely brutal. Thousands of people were arrested, including many officers and civilians who were not directly involved, but had ever been suspected of being anti-Hitler. Hans Oster was among them. Although he had been idle in house arrest for a year, his name was on the Reich's political enemies list. On July 21, 1944, a day after the failed assassination attempt, Oster was arrested by the Gestapo on Hitler's direct orders. He was then imprisoned and harshly interrogated. For security, the Nazis transferred important prisoners like Oster to concentration camps to prevent them from being freed by outsiders. Oster was eventually thrown into the Flossenburg concentration camp in Bavaria, along with several other opposition figures in early 1945. The fate of Oster and his comrades turned tragic in the final months of the war. On April 4, 1945, SS troops discovered Wilhelm Canaris's diary that had been hidden all this time. In the secret notes of the former Abwehr chief, many details about the anti-Hitler conspiracy since 1938 were revealed, including Oster's role as the mastermind of resistance in intelligence. When the report of the Canaris diary discovery reached Hitler, the Führer exploded in rage. Hitler immediately issued instructions that all prisoners involved in the conspiracy, both the July 20th conspirators and longtime opponents, be executed as quickly as possible. At Flossenburg camp, the Nazis held a drumhead court-martial on April 8, 1945, to carry out Hitler's order. Without adequate defense procedures, Hans Oster, along with Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Wilhelm Canaris, and other anti-Nazis, were sentenced to death by the SS tribunal on the same day. The next dawn, on April 9, 1945, the sentence was carried out. Oster and his comrades were executed by hanging on the gallows at Flossenburg camp. Their bodies were left hanging as a final spectacle of humiliation. This execution occurred just a few weeks before the Nazis surrendered, in early May 1945.